have mentioned deep linking a few times throughout the day, and also Google Now. We have the pleasure of having Google here to find out more about what they're doing with Google Now. And deep linking is a topic that gets a lot of attention, and there are lots of different ways it's playing out, lots of different definitions for what deep linking is. We're going to get into that in a bit. But really the underlying point is that as things move to mobile, as mobile engagement levels increase, as mobile takes over a larger share of people's time, a lot of that is app-based, and that has a lot of advantages in the kind of native functionality of apps, but also some disadvantages in that they're not as interoperable as the open web is that we've come to know and love. So deep linking seeks to kind of add more value to that overall proposition, and again, there are so many different ways that's playing out, and we have three great companies here that are kind of attacking that from different angles. So to start, why don't I have each of you guys introduce yourselves and your company, and then we'll just kind of launch into it from there. Vera, why don't you start?
Sure. Hey everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Vera. I focus on partnerships with our Search for Developers platform, which means the set of core search APIs that we have on mobile, both Android and iOS. And the core function of those APIs is to actually enable discovery for our partners on mobile. And so I work with our set of partners to help support that.
Excellent. Mike?
Great. So I'm the Chief Revenue Officer and co-founder of a New York-based company called Button. Previously worked at Google Wallet in Braintree, Venmo. And what Button does is we work with publishers. The local segment is a huge, huge audience for us. And what we do is we work to make publisher content actionable. So if you go to Foursquare or a local mapping site today, you typically go for information but can't act on it. What Button does is we work with the largest commerce providers on mobile, Uber, Airbnb, Ticketmaster. We bundle their APIs, and then we provide them to these publishers so that they can make their content actionable versus just information-based.
Paul?
Hi, Paul Ryan, CTO and founder of Quickly. It's an Idea Lab startup based in Pasadena. We were funded last June, and so we're still kind of a little bit in stealth mode. We're launching our product in the Q1 of next year. But fundamentally, we're addressing a lot of the gaps in mobile search. There's actionability of content, getting people to what they want to do quickly. There's actually aggregation of content and presenting it in a variety of different ways that are contextual for the user. And so we're working on all these problems, but under the rubric of mobile search.
And I want to thank Mike and Paul both for getting my memo about wearing the checkered gingham shirt.
Yeah, I went with Easter.
I guess I didn't. Thanks for sending it to me.
I forgot to send you the memo.
Yeah.
So let's start off, the term deep linking has come up a bunch. I mentioned it in basic terms just now. I'd like to get a sense from you guys in defining how you see deep linking. And of course, there's no right answer because it's taking on many different flavors. Like, Mike, what you guys are doing technically might not even be deep linking, but you're doing more custom integrations of bringing functionality from one app into another. Vera, you're working with Google Now on Tap, which is something that has its own flavor of deep linking. And then Paul, you're kind of living out these.
God knows what we're doing.
Yeah, you're living out these principles in probably lots of ways, even though parts of what you're doing are stealth. So I don't know, just to level set, I'd like to get each of your guys' kind of definition of this overall opportunity and the pain points that it's solving.
Yeah, definitely. So the core problem that ended up happening a couple of years ago when mobile started growing at such a breakneck pace is that we didn't have the best tools for discovery, right? A user had an average 36 apps downloaded on his or her device, but only really engaged with a quarter of them.
Yep.
And so what we started thinking about is, at Google, our core business is being able to deliver content, information, and services to users based on an intent. And a lot of those services and information now live in apps. And so when we think about deep linking, what we're actually saying is how can we get the user to the apps, discover the information and services in the apps so they can fulfill on that intent.
Yeah.
And so deep linking really is a technology that helps us understand the links within apps. And we've launched products like app indexing. That's really our core solution here to help Google understand deep links on mobile so that we can trigger them in search results, whether it's just on the search results page, products like Now on Tap, through autocomplete on the device, really the number of different search features on top of mobile.
And you guys did something recently that I'll mention briefly now and we can circle back to, which is almost, as I see it, deep linking on steroids, in that it's not just bringing in a deeply linked piece of content in a search result, but actually being able to stream the app directly within search results. I think that was a very interesting move, and we can circle back to that, but I think that relates to your comments about just bringing more utility to this current architecture of the appverse. So Mike, your kind of definition on what this opportunity is.
Yeah, so a deep link, at the most basic level, is simply a link that takes you to a specific page within an app, versus to the app homepage.
Yeah, which we've been doing for years. This is really nothing new in the open web, right?
Exactly. So just trying to get to parity with how simple it is to move between services on the open web, and it's really difficult right now, in the mobile ecosystem. And so, there was a study done recently that, 72 of the top 100 apps did not have a deep link schema in place. And it makes it really, really difficult to access that content and move between apps. So, apps are silos effectively today. We think that's going to change through the platform efforts, as well as efforts by individual app developers and companies like ourselves to make it easier to move between apps. So if I want to plan an evening out, I don't need to use 5 different apps, open them, start them, stop them, but I can do it all in one place, or I can more easily chain those actions together.
Yep. Paul, your thoughts?
That's a very, very interesting point. I mean, it's in the interest of the app owner to stay within the app, not to chain easily among apps.
Yep.
So I think when I think of deep linking, I think of the web circa 2000, 1999, where SEO was known, okay, but it really wasn't implemented. So sitemaps didn't exist, whatever. And people had to learn over time, over many years, how to create sites that were easily indexed by Google. And then we saw the innovation of kind of the sitemap leading to the sub-site links within the Google search results. In mobile, we're at the same place. We have these buckets of content where everyone's going to the home page, like in '99. It's like all the marketers are saying, damn it, go to my home page. That's where I'm tracking everything. Where consumers really wanted the deep content. So I think the major part of deep linking is fundamentally getting people to the content or action that they want to accomplish. Okay, and that's why I like Button. It's like pulling in the actions from apps within other apps to try to create that mesh. Realize, however, that that's a mesh that you're creating one app at a time.
Yeah.
Okay, and look, there's a power law distribution of apps in terms of usage, but that's a lot harder than hrefs on a web page. Okay, so the interesting thing is how quickly will this be, sorry, no pun intended, how quickly will this be adopted as kind of standards that people, if they're trying to get their app out there, or is this a phenomenon for the top 250 and it's not going to spread out to the tail? So what's really cool about mobile search is it really reminds me, search and discovery, we're back at 99.
Yeah.
Okay, it's still wide open. With a platform like Android, fantastic platform, you can do a whole bunch of stuff on that platform that potentially you can't do on iOS that allows you to try to knit things together. Yeah. And so that's what makes this a very, very exciting time.
And it is ironic going from, going back to a world of silos and walled gardens.
We're back to the AOL.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I always say the same thing about Facebook. We've moved on from these walled gardens. Now we're kind of gravitating back towards them. But also, I want to bring up a point, expand on a point you made about sometimes apps aren't incentivized to deep link because they're sending traffic elsewhere. I think that's probably not the case within Google because it's really bringing more utility to the search experience. So, app indexing keeps people within search and gives them a better tool to use search to kind of find their way to apps, right?
Right,
Yeah.
that's the hub, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. App indexing is really at its core helping Google understand that a link exists within an app. Really, it's that simple. So when, very similar to what you guys are familiar with, when you do a search query, we're able to understand that link exists and then trigger it in search. I think what's different on mobile is that the parameters you have by which to trigger a result have actually expanded very, very significantly. It's not just about Google crawling a web page, understanding what's in that web page, how it links to other web pages, and then triggering what we believe is the best web page based on a couple of words that you type in. But now what we can do with mobile is actually understand things like your context and then what needs you might have. And so when we actually start triggering these links or actions or services, we can be a lot more intelligent and helpful to you with those things. So for us, deep linking is almost table stakes. Launch app indexing help us understand how we can trigger those deep links, but there's a ton of stuff that we're doing with things like voice that's very mobile first, with Google Now, as you mentioned, that's very mobile first. That helps us actually assist the user on their mobile device way more than just triggering a link.
And we're actively working to educate app developers, including the messaging platforms, that, hey, it's okay to let folks leave your app.
Absolutely.
Folks are leaving your app.
Yeah.
They're just pressing the home button or moving on and shutting down the phone. Why don't you provide them some utility on the way out and some incentive potentially? So utility and incentive.
And I think that's the long-term view. If you're providing utility, even if sometimes you're sending people away, they're going to come back more often. And the overall retention, and it gets to the kind of the most important metrics in the app world are active usage, right? Not downloads. And if we're talking about active usage, it's providing that overall utility, and it's retention. It's getting them to come back by providing them an overall holistic view to begin with, even though sometimes that requires sending them elsewhere. Now, I want to go through a few examples of what this looks like. I forget what order I put these in. Actually, I had some of yours first.
That looks
Chris.
beautiful.
Gosh.
So you can speak to this, and this is your integration of Uber and Foursquare. That's an example of kind of connecting these disparate apps.
Absolutely. So, previously, even just 6 to 12 months ago, Foursquare was a local site, a place that you would look to for information. And then, when you wanted to book a reservation or take a ride to get where you were going, you actually had to leave the Foursquare app, and Foursquare was finding it challenging to monetize. And we approached them and we said, hey, there's a great way that you can add an additional revenue stream to your business, and that's by connecting to commerce. So why don't you make the information that folks are looking for in your apps actionable? So the example that we're showing here is an example of Uber. And an Uber button. You tap on that button right there with Uber. It pops a commerce card that actually pulls in the inventory using the Uber API on what cars are available, what it will cost, an estimated time of arrival. So you're actually pulling this really powerful information from one of the best apps in the world into your app, into Foursquare. And when the user taps that, this is where deep linking comes into play. If they have Uber installed, we send them directly through with the destination already populated, and they just use Apple Pay to pay. Or Android Pay. If they don't have the app installed, we use a process called attended install, and we actually render the installation directly within the app, within the Foursquare app. And it's a beautiful experience. It doesn't send the user out to the app store confused, hey, why did I go here? So it's a very curated experience, high quality design, makes the content actionable, and Foursquare generates revenue from each of the commerce partners that we integrate into their app.
Now, but isn't the limit of that, let's take the N square problem here. So there's 100 apps that could use this with 100 apps, whatever, and that's kind of it. That defines a certain marketplace and a size of kind of a business and addressable market that's way smaller than search marketing.
Not really. So first of all, mobile is going to, there's going to be 4 billion mobile devices by the end of the decade versus max 1 billion PCs ever. There's clearly a power law on mobile, but there's more attention than there's ever been. So there's more eyeballs, there's more space, even if it's across fewer services.
What I'm referring to here is the long tail of attention. Okay, if you're really hooking together top apps and capabilities, that's the top of the query distribution.
Oh,
okay?
Great point. Yep.
So the real issue is how do you unlock all of the content? And this is what I believe Google is trying to address. And one of the problems there, which is hard, and Google's smart enough to figure it out, but is you have to actively get these apps to participate in this and frankly write code to take advantage of it.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's, we can get into Google Now on tap in a bit, but I think one of the incentives of being that third-party app and signing up for that is the traffic you'll get in return for being part of that.
Absolutely, and the early adoption of that, you'll get a tremendous amount of traffic and adoption.
On the subject of deep links, something that the platforms did this year, both iOS and Android, was announce a standard for deep linking.
Yep.
Which enables apps large to small to be able to embed these deep links as a part of their entire development process, so that these links, again, are discoverable on things like search. So that's kind of one way to address the long-term
Absolutely,
problem.
and it's kind of very similar to like if you created a sitemap, Google will crawl you better. But the fundamental issue with 5 million apps out there and probably 100,000 that have some traction, you're going to get all that app ecosystem's not necessarily going to adopt it, right?
Well, that's true.
I mean,
That
'cause
also,
it's it's
that also brings up a good point, and you bring up the good point that if there are 100 top apps and they're kind of all deep linking to each other, it also brings up a good point, and this is probably a good question for you, Mike. What is the kind of maximum amount of kind of functionality you could have within an app like Foursquare before it becomes kind of a lot of deep linking fatigue or too many buttons? And
It's a great question, yeah. So I think we're moving to a world, so on the desktop it was, one central place where you went for information, so like one hub and, billions of nodes out of Google. I think on mobile you're going to have more hubs, multiple hubs, more verticalized, and therefore we don't need to jam, 50 buttons into Foursquare. The 5 buttons that make sense for Foursquare are going to be different than the 5 buttons that make sense for TripAdvisor or the 5 buttons that make sense for the NBA team apps. So I think you have to think about it as a totally different paradigm than how people access information.
That makes sense. Now, another reason I'm glad you brought up this integration of Uber and Foursquare is I think that one of the impetus for part of this is that a lot of the on-demand services out there, what's inherent in that is a certain amount of immediacy. So the pain point of bouncing around to different apps is even more painful when you need that car right then. So I guess the question is it the growth of the on-demand economy and all the apps in that world kind of providing more of a fertile ground for all these things we're talking about?
Well, absolutely, especially if you're planning some trip, you're going to a bunch of bars with your friends, and you need some errands done. You want to be able to link directly to that and actually get the action done.
Yeah.
So it's you can do that simply on the web as well. I mean, it's actually well established there. But the on-demand economy also, there are going to be lots of on-demand providers out there. So you're assuming there's going to be the Ubers and the Lyfts and this whole slew of integrations that you guys are going to provide. That's almost a menu to an app. They figure out contextually what's going to be most relevant to them, and then that will help build out the tail of functionality.
Exactly. Startups do the hard work of...
Yeah, startups do all the hard work of engaging the consumer, and you tie it together and make it functional.
Yep.
So let's drill down actually on Google Now. This is something we talked about a little bit, and Google Now is really a precursor to Now on Tap, which really brings in more of the deep linking discussion. But let's start at the beginning and talk about Google Now and how it's really more of a discovery engine and moving Google into this app-based world, personalizing, predicting things, and pushing you things based on the unique array of things you might have in your inbox and other places.
Yeah, Google Now started several years ago with a kind of quintessential group of hackers who asked themselves the question, why do I even have to query for something? Why can't I just get pushed the information that I need in this moment? And there was a lot of foresight into that. So we've been focusing on Google Now on useful information to you at the right moment based on the context you're in. So for example, if you received an email confirmation for an upcoming flight, what we'll do is package the information we have, like whether the flight's on time, whether it's delayed, what the traffic conditions are, as well as the flight that you booked from your email. And
weather perhaps too.
Weather as well for your destination, and actually push you a card that includes when you should leave to get to your flight on time based on traffic conditions, as well as based on the time, whether it's delayed or not, as well as your boarding pass, and then the user had to do absolutely nothing. And that's a pretty magical experience that has a ton of different utility. And so we've been testing with many hundreds and hundreds of cards over the last several years, and it's very much an exciting product for us where we're actually starting to take a lot of the signals that we get from mobile and pushing really valuable information to users.
Now, getting more into kind of the deep linking aspect of this and also broadening the utility and the data sets beyond just, Google's properties like Gmail, that's where Google Now on Tap comes in. Tell us about this and the value proposition for the third-party apps. And this gets to your question, Paul, about, how do you get those guys to sign up for that? And you're right, the analogy of a kind of a sitemap is similar. So, Vera, tell us about Now on Tap as an extension of what you just mentioned for Now.
Yeah, definitely. I think what everyone was discussing here is the difference between kind of head partners and long tail. And the truth is that the problem that we're solving with search on mobile is actually a discovery problem. Like if you have, again, a certain intent, a need, basically a search query, if it can be fulfilled by a long tail app, we should be able to trigger it for you. And so that's what we're doing with search. And then what we're doing with Now on Tap is actually not just taking search within just like the Google app. With Now on Tap, and this is on Android, is when a user long presses on the home screen, what we're able to do is trigger assistance to the user. So if you're having a conversation with a friend about a dinner reservation or upcoming movie that you want to see, when the user long presses, they get a set of deep links to apps, again, enabled through app indexing, to get more information from the context of your conversation. And the user has to do nothing except get that, invoke the assistant, and then the developer has to do nothing except launch app indexing.
How does the logic, oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
How does the logic work around sort of what shows when you press that Now on Tap?
It's a ranking problem. So we actually use the ranking that we have through the knowledge graph in search to trigger the apps according to the rank in search.
Wow. So far be it for me to be the guy to talk about monetization and kind of the app ecosystem and actually generating revenue. But in a weird way here, you're kind of taking user attention away from the app, moving it to potentially other content and apps, so that, it's a double-edged sword participating in this as an app developer. I mean, so that the one thing that we haven't chatted about is the engine of monetization for all this. And I hate to be the dirty person to talk about money, but without search monetization, we wouldn't have Google.
Right.
Okay? And so the issue becomes if this becomes the method, whether it's iOS or whether it's Android, where all this app content is opened up for free and there's no way that an app developer can monetize it,
Sure.
it's what's in their interest to do all of this stuff. So that's the other 900-pound gorilla in the room, which is, like, how are you going to make money on this?
Well, sure.
So it's easy to figure out how Google would make money
yeah.
or Apple would make money, but it's hard to figure out how Joe Developer is going to make money.
Well, Vera, what's your proposition to them in terms of incentivizing them to participate in this? Is it, you're sending them activity by being a part of the Google Now experience, you're pulling them in? To answer Paul's question, how are you conveying that value proposition to those apps?
So, for example, the apps in this screenshot, both Yelp and OpenTable, we're driving traffic to those apps. And so if you launch app indexing, and Yelp and OpenTable have, we're actually driving new high-quality traffic to them.
And you would argue high-intent traffic too, right?
High-intent traffic.
Now, this also brings up a good point, and these are probably some pretty logical integrations. Messaging, talking about a night out, and then going to Yelp or OpenTable. And Mike, you probably see a lot of integrations that make sense. Restaurants along with movie theaters, or travel along with hospitality, and things like that. Where do you see, and we talked about how on-demand is driving a lot of this, but where do you see the mashups where, possibly the areas of growth? Where
so the biggest areas of growth that I see are, we fundamentally believe that there is more room for buttons than there are for ads on mobile devices. So we believe any ad could theoretically be a button.
Yeah.
If we have, we don't need explicit context and intent.
Yeah.
We can infer that over time as we see what services folks are using. And then you'll also have, sort of what you would call inventory, places in a hotel app to provide a concierge service that previously weren't places that were monetizable. So there are just a tremendous, I wouldn't only think about it as highly contextual complementary services, but a total rethinking of what it means to have somebody engage with real estate in your app and what value you provide to them, and how powerful the information is that you pull in from other parties when somebody engages with that space in your app.
And that brings up a premise we were talking about in an earlier session with, mobile moving from this mindset around advertising and how do we target ads into more action buttons. And maybe that goes further in answering your question, Paul, about how that third party monetizes it by, instead of getting an exposure or an impression or a click, they're getting a reservation or a test drive appointment or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, but the CPA universe didn't take over the web.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Right? And there's a reason for that, because there's different I guess, responsibilities and liabilities down the value chain.
Yep.
Right? And so if you're not tracking things appropriately or you're not a particularly nice actor, it doesn't potentially work. One of the things that's interesting about this in general is we're always describing these use cases that we're enumerating. We're saying, hey, I'm going to go out with my friends, and then I'm going to go do this and whatever. We're using our imaginations to come up with these scenarios of lots of different apps. Yeah. That's fundamentally different than the way web search works, okay, which is answering your questions and potentially, it's not trying to divine your intentions per se. It's trying to textually give you answers that potentially could be relevant. So one of the things that I worry about is we're going to run out of gas with that at some point, where it's the same 100 apps and the 100 apps. It's the same, back when Geo was hot, it's the same map with all the Starbucks around you. We're using the same exact examples to make this good, and then there's the rest of the time where this won't exist. So I think fundamentally that's the limit, I think, to the way we're thinking about this, or at least the way we're talking about it.
Sure.
Yeah, we haven't talked as much about, so for example, sending somebody to an app from a search result is something that we're highly focused on. So it's not happening today because most apps, don't have the ability to receive incoming links or defer deep links through install. But I don't see, for example, somebody doing a kayak search today sees a number of different results about flights, and if they tap on them, they're sent out to the mobile web.
What I'm saying is that the size of the problem is much, much larger than the web search size. We're now, the vector, this huge vector of information that we have about a user, where they've been, what they've interacted with, far above and beyond the desktop, can be used to target this stuff. But that's a completely different approach, okay? And then, understanding the complexity of that. But then the second point, which we haven't mentioned at all, is the creep factor.
Well, sure.
Right? I mean, so iOS 9, they're really, with all the announcements and whatever, and creating the walled garden of apps, and not understanding what apps are installed and all that, they're trying to address that head on in terms of, letting people feel comfortable and putting things on the device and creating that local index and whatever, as opposed to, where you have the most power, which is tracking them and applying large algorithms to these huge repositories of data.
Sure.
So that's kind of one of the limiting factors, the device level security. How much can we do?
Well, also the unique art of push. You're essentially talking about something that's moving from pull to push. So if it's going to be push, it better be damn good. And also, what's the formula of not overburdening someone while also being this very good utility that's predicting the things they want and the number of times per day they want to be alerted to that. And that's probably a unique art that you guys are probably learning a lot about. I'm not sure how much you can discuss it, but I think that's part of the answer. It's not the whole answer. Any thoughts, Vera, on just what you're learning from, based on the fact that Google Now is based very much on push?
Yeah.
What are you guys learning from that?
Yeah, it definitely is based on push. So something that we've started experimenting with is assistance when users add a place. So what we do right now is we trigger information when you're at a specific restaurant based on Google data, as well as a partnership that we have with Foursquare, where Foursquare pushes a card to the user when they're at a specific location. Foursquare doesn't know that the user is at that location unless the user engages, but that gives Foursquare distribution to users who don't even have their app. And then what we do is we take an aggregate kind of selection of all of that. So when the user is at a place, what kind of assistance can we offer? And then we actually trigger a low priority, which means it doesn't buzz or bing you, but it appears kind of lower priority to say you're at a place. Here's the valuable information that you might want. So when you tap it, you get that valuable information, such as the best meals to have at a restaurant, according to Foursquare. Even if you've never interacted with Foursquare or really known that Foursquare actually has really, really high quality content. And so you're right, it's a fine art, but we want to make sure if we're buzzing phones or if we're pushing notifications in general, that it's really high quality assistive content.
So let's switch gears slightly. I want to give you the chance to talk about something that I mentioned earlier, which is your most recent, or probably not most recent announcement. Google has lots of announcements, but it was recently, where within search results, you can basically test drive an app without going through the friction of going to the App Store, being bounced to the App Store to download it and come back and all that. It's essentially, it's technically streaming an app. The app sits on Google servers, but you're interacting with it remotely. Tell us a little bit about that, its drivers and the benefits for users, and probably the app developers too.
Yeah, so again, this solves the kind of primary discovery problem that we're seeing on mobile, where a user, even if we were to trigger an app-first app in search results, like you would have to tap on it, you would have to go to the Play Store, you would sit and wait until the app downloaded, you would probably be faced with a login screen, then you go to the content, maybe if it's a services app, you would have to plug in your payment information. You're a ton of taps kind of
It's not very quick, is it?
Yeah, and that's one of the friction points of why discovery is hard on mobile. And so what we've done is we've started experimenting with running full end-to-end app experiences through search, through something called app streaming. It's very much an experiment we launched with a partner, Hotel Tonight. And so what you can do, again, Hotel Tonight is a very app-first type of company that didn't appear in search results, and now they do through app streaming. And what you could do is you could go end-to-end, literally book a hotel through app streaming on mobile without the app being downloaded.
In Google, is it a Google payment, Android Pay, or is it a Hotel Tonight booked like via Braintree?
The same way that the app interacts as if you were to download it through the Play Store, it behaves as an app streaming. So first experiments, very, very early, but we're excited about kind of solving this discovery problem with things like that.
What do you guys think about the UI aspect of all of this? You mentioned a long press earlier in the Google Now on Tap experience. I wrote an article about a month ago riffing on kind of Apple's 3D touch, which I see almost as a version of deep linking or a corollary to deep linking. Instead of deep linking deep within another app, you can kind of peek what's within that app or what's on the other side of that link. And it's bringing more of a multi-dimensional kind of touch experience instead of this binary world of like either I clicked on it or I didn't. What do you guys think about the UI aspect of all this?
We think it's like our Commerce Card, right?
Sure.
This notion of you tap a button and it shows you some options. I mean, I think it's very similar to Now on Tap where you show a few options.
Yeah.
Everybody's moving in this direction because people don't want to make that commitment. Advertisers have pretty much lost the trust of mobile users, and so you need to preview and show that you can provide a recognized brand or recognized value or something that's a signal that they should tap through.
So it's a new layer of UX.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's what, you gotta love Apple, right? Because they're always out there pushing the envelope on tap, do I go see it, do I preview it, whatever, in very easy to use ways.
Absolutely.
And so it's another type of action at some point.
Yeah.
I think the fun thing about the app preview within the search results is that's great, because app acquisition is one of the hardest problems out there. Sorry to be the Grinch, but also apps right now, finding apps are not necessarily the center, relying 100% on Google right now, right? And so there's other ways that people will find apps and what have you. So in a weird way, you kind of have to do that to make the search engine results page relevant, okay? So
Well
now
said.
it's bringing the primacy of Google back as kind of the app acquisition, and that's a multi-billion-dollar-a-year business.
Oh, absolutely.
Right there. So it's, it's great for the users, but it's also now we're once again reaggregating, into one location.
The follow-on announcement was that same technology, I believe, is now being used for advertising or app developers and this is mostly around games where you can do kind of a preview. It's almost like an app install ad, but with the additional
It's like
preview
a container
function.
that you're running it at,
Yep.
So we're actually out of time, but I want to give each of you guys the chance to, this is how I'm ending all my panels, this theme is next. What do you guys see as next within the context of this discussion, or anything you didn't get a chance to say in the last half hour?
Well, just from the discussion that we've had here, I think it's still wide open. It's still a little bit of the Wild West, how actually mobile and mobile search and discovery is going to evolve, which is awesome, right? There's an ecosystem that both Apple and Google have created that we need to create compelling user experiences in, app to app, aggregations, what have you. So it's not, the game is just beginning here.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So, from our perspective, one big trend we see is that we think direct response advertising is going to move all the way down the funnel to the transaction, because you can pretty much transact with a merchant in pretty much any vertical goods or services today, and that's only going to increase over the next 5 years. So I would look for direct response advertising to move away from calls, to move away from a lot of signals that don't guarantee a transaction, and much, much, much closer to an actual transaction.
The things that used to be proxies for a conversion, the actual conversion.
But not everyone wants conversions. So that's
true. Yeah,
the
that's
huge
sometimes-
part of
Oh, I'm just saying
advertising is
in
not
commerce.
conversions.
Sometimes
I
it's
was
branding.
speaking from a
Yeah.
commerce lens.
So Vera, final thoughts.
I would say that it's an exciting time in mobile, but the truth is your smartphone isn't very smart. It has all of these great capabilities, but the potential that we have here is to be able to build a tool to get you even more information, more services, to make your life even easier. Why can't your phone tell you the ride wait times when you're at a theme park? Why can't your phone book you a car when you need to be somewhere? Why can't you get information on a flight that you've been looking at when the price drops? And so something that we absolutely want to do for users is be able to bring that intelligence to them so they can make their lives better. And then for developers, in the same way that it's worked on desktop web, when users get that benefit, what we drive for developers is both discovery and additional traffic.
Well, that's well said, and we have to end it there. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.